Hello, everybody. I'm Mary Lee.
And this is Johnny Madcap.
And this is Entertainment 13. So instead of your typical reaction content, which is a very wonderful staple on YouTube, and I watch quite a bit of reaction content myself, we tend to talk a lot. A lot.
We like to analyze.
And, bullshit our way through things as well. It's how I got through high school and parts of college. But so rather than talking over a show or in this case documentary and generally pissing you off more than we're already going to, we figure we'll actually just pause before we speak so that we can add whatever we're going to add and not compete with the video for your attention. And then if this is a documentary you haven't seen before, which I don't think you have, this has been on YouTube for 7 years, and this is one they used to show on History Channel every year. I watched this every year growing up from about junior high on. It's like a tradition for me. So that said, this is something we're going to try and do every year at Halloween, is doing a documentary based around something that you typically see at Halloween. So right now this is Origins of Halloween, All Hallows Eve, Hauntober. Those of you who are familiar with my book channel, Hauntober, although I haven't even done that yet. Anyways, I'm thinking next year maybe we can do the Pendleton Witch, and then one year we'll do werewolves and shit like that. Eventually we are going to get some other content going on. We are going to do a watch along for, did we decide on the first Halloween or trick or treat for this year?
I honestly don't even remember offhand. It's probably written down somewhere.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But watch alongs, instead of just doing it as instead of doing the show and then putting it to Patreon, we're just going to do it where you sync it up with your copy of Halloween or whatever movie we're doing at the time, and watch it along with this kind of riff tracks, except we're going to keep it free. And then we're also going to have this style that you're going to see today for a lot of Disney and other big company IPs, but we're going to be doing that over on Rumble because they're a little bit less slam happy with copyright and stuff. So that said, let's get into Origins of Halloween.
It's coming. There's no escape. On Halloween, the veil between this world and the next will lift. And then, all hell breaks loose. People have been scared.
Living together, mass hysteria.
It's another good movie. So, right off the bat, you can tell they're going to have really good with the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. With the general feel of Halloween. And wow, I picked a really interesting picture to pause on, didn't I?
Hey, pause food. Not everybody has it.
True.
Scaring each other for as long as there's been a Halloween. But how long is that? Where does it come from? And why do we put on disguises and carve jack-o'-lanterns? To indulge our darkest fears? Unlocking the secrets of Halloween means discovering how it all began thousands of years ago. So lock the doors, dim the lights, and don't be scared as we dig up the real story of Halloween.
So on a production level, I like the way they put it to where it looked like the real story of Halloween almost was part of
the actual railing itself, yeah.
Yeah. I do like to point out things about production value, even though I know nothing about production.
How can you describe Halloween without sounding insane? Masked children come to our doors and threaten us. In return, we give them candy. But why? Why do we carve faces into fruit, then light candles inside them? And why do we adorn?
A lot of Europeans look at American Halloween traditions with trick-or-treating and they're like, I don't understand where that developed from, because there are other traditions in different parts of Europe pertaining to Hallows Eve and whatnot. That actually does get covered in here.
Oh, I'm sure, and again, I'm pretty sure I've actually seen this, but it's been a
In our homes with coffins and tombstones. The truth is, we take great pleasure in scaring ourselves to death.
Halloween is about being someone else. It's about getting outside your own skin. And I think we tolerate it because we know it's one night.
This impulse to confront our fears of life and of death and make sport of them, it's ancient, and so are our treasured Halloween traditions. When did Halloween begin?
And its ancient origins go back to the old Celtic calendar. And the old Celtic tribes divided the year between a light half and a dark half. And Samhain, their ancient holiday, was a precursor to our Halloween and was the beginning of the dark half.
Thousands of years ago, the Celts, one of Europe's early tribes, celebrated their Samhain harvest festival with bonfires on the night of October 31st to welcome their new year. For ancient peoples, harvest was a matter of life and death. If crops failed, people starved. Death was always close.
It was a bit of a warning. You know, it's going to get cold and dark.
because it's the middle point between actual autumn equinox and the first day of winter.
Okay.
Yep, September 21st, October 31st, December 21st.
Because fall and spring are equinox, and then winter and summer are solstice, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Gather together, come home, and don't send anybody out alone in the dark.
But the Celts believed there was even more to Samhain.
What marked Samhain and this transition from light to dark was that time and space became permeable, flexible. And so that spirits, not only of the dead, but of the past or of other realities, could sort of wander into our reality, and humans could wander out and get lost in the other world as well.
The veil between life and death was at its thinnest, and the living and the dead could commingle. And that's at the root of all the Halloween celebrations.
Stories persist of people on Samhain night getting trapped in the other world, and of the dead appearing among the living. But the truth is, we know precious little about Samhain. We can only guess that their bonfires likely drew one familiar Halloween icon, a thing familiar, yet frightening to many: the bat.
Before there was electricity, the only...
So what do we know specifically about bats besides this for Halloween? Or is it just one of those ones that mysteriously became part of Halloween decor and culture?
Oh, they've always been kind of creepy to a lot of people. And like I think they're about to point out, when they were doing their bonfires and that sort of thing, a lot of times it would actually attract the bats or throw off their sonar, so they'd start going crazy all over the place.
Yeah, I do know there are some vampire bats. I don't think that's all bats. I think it's some bats, correct?
Yeah, there are species of vampire bat, but usually Africa or South America. You don't really find them that often in Europe, North America, that sort of thing.
But the point when Bram Stoker's Dracula was being written was right about the time you saw more trade between Europe and Africa picking up, correct? I could be wrong. I'm terrible with history.
Yeah, very possibly. I mean, Victorian age, so I mean, it was...
Stories would migrate. Okay, just checking.
The way you would have seen a bat would have been by the firelight. And in fact, you probably would have seen it around the fire because bats eat insects, and insects are attracted to the light.
Bats come out at night, and nighttime was scary time. So if bats are the best and baddest part of your Halloween, you might just credit ancient people like the Celts. And they weren't the only ancient culture with creepy traditions. Others also looked to their dead.
Many, many cultures sort of set aside a day or a couple of days to ritually celebrate and recognize the dead. An interesting thing is that you find a lot of them about the same time period, especially in agricultural societies, because if you think about it, spring things come up out of the ground, they're very green, you harvest in the middle of the summer, and towards the fall, and when it gets towards winter, things die.
How did these ancient traditions survive into our modern era? In Western culture, they were preserved by, of all people, Christians. In a bizarre twist of history, as Christianity spread, it adopted and reimagined pagan folkways rather than try to stamp them out. This made it easier to convert pagans. A key pagan festival destined to get a Christian makeover was Lemuria, when celebrants placated the dead, culminating on May 13th.
Of all the different days that they have in the Roman calendar to celebrate the dead, it was the spookiest. So on the Lemuria, what are called the larvae, the ghosts of the departed, would come up and haunt people.
To quell the dead, pagan Romans poured milk onto their graves or offered them little cakes. But the church co-opted Lemuria in 609 AD, turning May 13th into All Saints' Day, a day to honor the most holy of dead Christians.
Setting aside this day was an attempt to Christianize this very pagan festival, and yet at the same time what it did was it kept a lot of the same themes going.
The Christianized version of Lemuria was such a success that church leaders made a decision that eventually gave rise to Halloween. They moved All Saints, or Hallows Day, to November 1st to drain the life out of pagan Samhain. Because Samhain...
Now see, I can understand the whole concept of like, oh, we're gonna do our version of a pagan celebration. Intentionally moving it to halfway later in the month is kind of a bit dickish, and I'm a born-again Christian over here, so, but I can definitely understand where various different religious groups would be like, this is fucked up. Now again, as a born-again Christian, I do try to, I'm a very crappy born-again Christian, in case we couldn't tell, but I do try to adhere to the teachings of the Bible, but I actually do acknowledge and accept the fact that a lot of things were usurped from other religions and faiths.
Right. Cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation.
Oh God, don't start. Do not start.
Fell on the night of October 31st, before All Hallows Day on November 1st. People started calling Samhain All Hallows Evening, the evening before All Hallows Day. This shortened into All Hallows Even, and finally into Halloween. And then, to be safe, the church went one step further, adding a holiday to honor not just saints, but everyday Christians. November 2nd became All Souls Day, a church-sanctioned holiday to honor the departed.
This is real important for Halloween because this is where Halloween gets its association with dead souls, death, and the supernatural again.
So thank the church for inspiring the creepy essentials of Halloween. But wait, there's more. The church also helped establish the tradition of trick-or-treating, sort of. It all started during the Middle Ages on All Souls Day, when priests told Christians to pray for souls trapped between heaven and hell in a netherworld they called purgatory.
Purgatory was not a pleasant place. It's not hell. It's not as bad as hell is, but it's still probably pretty fiery. Souls are kind of suffering there. Luckily, there is something that you could do. You could offer up prayers for them.
How did souls get out of purgatory? According to the church, if enough prayers were offered, a soul would fly up into heaven. This led to a medieval custom that bears more than a striking resemblance to our modern trick-or-treat. Children would go souling, begging for soul cakes, spiced cakes filled with raisins. In return for these treats, the beggars would offer up prayers for souls trapped in purgatory.
Now, you would think that would be an origin for trick-or-treating, and it very well may have fed into it a little bit. But trick-or-treating as we see it in the U.S., I don't believe this is actually what led to it. And I think they do comment on it later on.
It's literally the beginnings of what becomes a much different tradition later on, yes.
Yeah. So, but if I remember correctly, because it's been a few years since I watched this, because it took me forever to find it on YouTube, and they don't show it on History Channel every year anymore. But from what I remember, it was other traditions, and what became trick-or-treating kind of evolved out of a necessity to distract angsty kids.
Well, let's see if they get to it.
While this forerunner to trick-or-treat became a preoccupation for medieval Christians, so did another future essential of Halloween: witches.
It made perfect sense for people in medieval times to believe that there were demons and witches. And if there were demons and witches and they were responsible for bad things in the world, it made sense that you hunt them down and you kill them. That was their worldview.
A witch panic in the 16th century helped establish the look of the character that, for many, epitomizes Halloween. Almost always women, witches were seen as in league with Satan.
They were probably the healers who had cures and folklore and passed down orally through generations. And at some point, that becomes very suspicious for whatever reason to the religious people around them. And a lot of the symbols that were associated with these women, who probably often lived alone, may have been somewhat eccentric, of course, end up becoming associated with witches.
Over time, as more and more women were accused of witchcraft, their practical kitchen tools acquired sinister dimensions and became model Halloween icons. Even something as mundane as a broom became an instrument of evil, as well as handy transportation. Another accessory in every witch's lair was perfect for brewing devilish potions: the cauldron.
Cauldrons become very popular. Again, it was something that every household had in medieval ages. It was your basic cooking implement.
The pointed witch's hat was a variation on a medieval countrywoman's hat. And of course, the mysterious lurking killer with the glowing eyes, the cat.
It's not surprising that cats are associated with witches and Halloween. Cats can be a little enigmatic. You don't really know what's going on in their head. Also, they used to hang out near the hearth and by the brooms, so they became associated with witchcraft and with Halloween.
Black cats and witches, graveyards and ghosts. The spooky elements of America's great Gothic holiday were taking shape. These ghoulish icons would soon make their way to the New World, where they'd help create the extravaganza we know today. Bonfires, worshiping the dead, begging for treats. The elements of our modern Halloween were haunting Europe at the dawn of the 17th century, but they hadn't yet collected into a spooky, secular holiday. History would now start consolidating them and give life to an odd celebration of death.
So they didn't really seem to expand too much on the witch trials and all this. I mean, to be fair, there's too many of them to really comment on.
And with a 41-minute special, I mean, you know,
it's just the highlight reel.
Yeah, they're only going to be able to go in depth, you know, so deep with certain things. Yeah. So.
And then there's also the fact that it's just different areas. The hysteria picked up for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it goes all the way back to the original Spanish Inquisition back during the Crusades.
Mm-hmm. And then
which was well before, like, you know, Salem and all that, so.
Yeah, and then over time it kind of devolved into, oh, this person, you know, ticked me off, this person shunned me, I want that person's land, so on and so forth. It's interesting.
Or some wee Scottish bastard somehow becomes king and, well, screws the whole thing up.
This is true too. But most people don't realize that I don't think any of the witches of Salem were burned, because that was a European thing, because witchcraft was seen as heresy, or tied to heresy, whereas in Salem it was just evil.
They were usually either hung or drowned, yeah.
Or if you refused to plead, therefore preventing court from proceeding, allowing your family to keep your own property when you die, they'd crush you to death to try and get you to plead. So
it's death that makes this holiday. Whether it's the threat of death if there is a bad harvest, the end of one order or the beginning of a new, this idea of the endless cycle of life and death and renewal is part of a lot of holidays, not just Halloween.
This period saw the continued influence of one of Halloween's most colorful icons, the mask. It often appeared in tandem with another Halloween tradition, destructiveness. Rowdy beggars at All Hallows Eve also guzzled their share of alcohol, and demands for food and drink became more threatening. Masks helped hide their identities.
In Britain, they got into some very particular forms that involved dressing in costumes and going house to house to present these little plays. And at the end of the performance, they would be rewarded with food and sometimes money.
Was this trick or treat? Not quite, but the resemblance was there. In 17th century England, many of these customs survived only in rural areas, but they would soon turn up in the city streets, thanks to a pro-Catholic terrorist named Guy Fawkes. On November 5th, 1605, Fawkes tried to blow up London's House of Lords with 36 kegs of gunpowder.
Guy Fawkes was tried, found guilty, and hanged. And according to legend, his body was then drawn and quartered, and the pieces were thrown into a fire.
The next year, on the anniversary of the failed plot, and every year that followed, the children of London mocked the memory of Guy Fawkes by causing chaos in the streets, parading, begging, and building bonfires.
For some reason, when they mentioned the kids mocking Guy Fawkes, made me think of the one episode of Daria where it was the holidays, and they were mentioning No Guy Fawkes Day, and Jane, No Guy Fawkes Day. Eventually, we're gonna get to Daria on this channel too.
Today, all over England, this is called Guy Fawkes Day, or Bonfire Night.
Now, Guy Fawkes Day fell on November 5th, which is very close to Halloween, so a lot of the energy that was focused on Halloween sort of shifted toward Guy Fawkes Day.
While it wasn't our Halloween yet, it had all the signs. Children and adults alike taking advantage of the darkness and letting loose. But would this pagan form of celebration make its way across the Atlantic to disrupt the sanctuary of the New World? Not if colonial Puritans had their way. For the Puritans of New England, the supernatural was a dark, menacing force, not a harmless superstition worthy of inspiring a holiday. Despite their efforts to kill the Halloween tradition before it took hold, there were a few Guy Fawkes celebrations that made their way to the shores of America. Other settlers tolerated or even embraced the traditions that threatened the Puritans. And seeds were planted for the holiday that would morph into our American Halloween.
For example, there's an 1833 description of a Halloween, not even so much a party, but just a small gathering where they told ghost stories around a fire.
But now, one more spooky standby. The image of a spirit or ghost would join witches and skeletons in a macabre Halloween dance. By the mid-19th century, America was primed for a much darker holiday. Having endured 4 long years of civil war that ended in 1865 with over 500,000 dead.
There were so many unclaimed, unknown dead bodies that the Civil War left behind that this country was obsessed with death. And mostly it was that so many of these soldiers died unknown. We don't know what happened to them. So there was a huge sense of they could come back. Maybe they're not dead. It makes perfect sense that people would tell more ghost stories. And the very first Halloween ghost stories were about people coming back home.
It's at this time that America's Halloween story really begins. After the Civil War, when Scots and Irish immigrants brought their rural, Old World Halloween customs with them, they helped to establish even more American Halloween traditions.
For the Scots, it was a little bit of a scarier night. Until fairly late, we're...
Sorry.
Anything else you want to get off your chest?
That's okay. I've got me wee little potato here, and I've carved it in my face. And there's a candle in it. And it goes, ooh. Be much better if I actually had a little potato in hand to be able to do that. But, you know.
True. Well, in typical Irish fashion, we do have a whole bag of them in the kitchen.
It is true.
We're still talking about the appearance of bogies on Halloween.
Bogies, or boogeymen, were sort of amorphous, pestering ghosts that plagued children, hiding under beds or tapping on windows, or lurking by a gate or turnstile.
There was a belief that there was a bogey on every stile, which meant on Halloween night you could cross any gate and there might be something sitting there waiting to get you.
Halloween's signature symbol, the jack-o'-lantern, also began as a European tradition. But the prototype wasn't carved from a pumpkin.
There's a great legend about a character named Jack-o'-lantern.
And Jack was a troublemaker, but he was so bad, he even managed to get himself thrown out of hell, which is not an easy thing to do.
But...
Have you ever heard the story of Jack-o'-lantern?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What was it he did that got him tossed out of hell?
Just basically, from what I recall, being an unruly bastard. When you're enough of a handful that even the devil is like, okay, I can't put up with you. Get out. You're doing something right.
Okay, so to me, that's like not necessarily the unruly aspect. It's just he figured out Satan's buttons and was like, I'm going to push him till you put me out of here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not a bad choice if that's where you're at.
I mean, to be honest, it's 100% the exact sort of, like, tact I would take. I mean, but we know me, so...
Yeah, you're not wrong. That is what you would do.
The devil did decide to have pity on him and scooped up an ember from the fires of hell and gave it to him.
So Jack takes the ember and he puts it inside a hollowed out turnip. And he walks around and that becomes the legend of Jack-o'-lantern.
In one age-old European...
I always thought the reason for the jack-o'-lantern was because of the legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Nope, the jack-o'-lantern actually came first. Sleepy Hollow basically just picked up the idea that, hey, if you have a headless horseman and you need something that approximates a head, jack-o'-lantern's probably a pretty good thing.
I mean, it makes sense. At least it's made to look like a face. So, if we ever get a chance to, no, I do want to go to Sleepy Hollow for Halloween one year if we can. Won't be for a while, but...
In practice, children would carve their own jack-o'-lanterns out of turnips and light them with candles.
The first reference we have in the United States to jack-o'-lantern, it comes from Nathaniel Hawthorne, and he's writing in Twice Told Tales, and he's describing someone's very tattered coat full of holes, and when you hold it up to the light, it shines like a jack-o'-lantern would.
Americans improved on the jack-o'-lantern tradition. They substituted big, round pumpkins for the old world's hard little turnips, and Halloween finally had its trademark. Pumpkins are generally harvested around Halloween, And kids realized jack-o'-lanterns could be a prankster's best weapon on Halloween night.
Kids figured out this great thing they could do. They could take a pumpkin and you could hollow it out and you put a candle on it. And then you take that pumpkin and you put it on a stick and you put a sheet over it. And you parade around, you can put it in front of a window or something, and it's really a pretty scary picture.
Jack-o'-lanterns soon became the face of Halloween. But Scots and Irish immigrants also brought with them the more rambunctious, stone-throwing, prank-playing Halloween reveling to America. And on Halloween night, at the dawn of the 20th century, there was
some dear Irish boys.
There's actually a reference to this in a Judy Garland movie, Meet Me in St. Louis, because it comes to Halloween night and her younger sister kind of got in trouble because they were throwing something on one of the tracks for the trolley, I think, and they were pointing out, like, you can hurt people like
oh,
that,
yeah.
you know?
Even back then, they wholeheartedly realized you can derail stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's not that hard to do.
But it does kind of go to show how, and I'm sure they're going to talk about it, but how ubiquitous it came. That they were referencing it in old Hollywood musicals.
Yeah.
So.
a whole dark world of trouble just waiting for American boys. Halloween had been on a dark and scary journey from its origins with the Celts centuries ago. In the Middle Ages, it became a Christian holiday honoring the dead. But by the 16th century, it was turning into a rowdy kids' celebration, marked by begging and pranks. By the 1800s, Halloween had even moved into cities and towns across America. But the ghastly face of Halloween was reimagined in gruesome shades of orange and black at the turn of the 20th century. For the first time, artists of the era brought together all things scary and linked them to Halloween. Skeletons and spiderwebs, jack-o'-lanterns and bats. They established the look of Halloween that we still use today. Among these icons are white-sheeted ghosts.
The sheet that a ghost wears derives from the winding sheet, the shroud that corpses were traditionally wrapped in before burial.
And jack-o'-lanterns.
The big grin still connotes the rictus of a death's head, as does the triangular nose hole. And even when it seems kind of jolly, death is still lurking there in the imagery.
Horned devils came from medieval depictions of Satan. And witches from witch-hunting hysteria that swept through Europe and Puritan America.
Witches became very popular in the early part of the 20th century, which is why they naturally became linked to Halloween.
Also known as the Witch Hunter's Bible, effectively.
Yeah. I mean, it was typically used to go after women, but it was used to go after men as well.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that doesn't get pointed out sometimes. But really, it was just anyone who went against society's grain, so to speak. It was, oh, you're different, you're evil. Not dissimilar from how things happen now. It's just different words and verbiage. Mm-hmm. But it would make sense to an extent that women who were midwives would be gone after a little bit more, because women were not allowed to be educated in the ways of medicine. So the fact that they had these, hand-me-down medicines and things, but they couldn't go to school for it. Ooh, it must be, dark magic, which is hilarious, because theirs was based in intuitive knowledge. It was things that they learned over time, whereas the doctors and medical professionals of the time were really operating off of what we would call now pseudoscience, because it was around the time you'd have like the four humors and
I was gonna say
all these
leeching
things.
and all that sort of stuff. Yep.
So, but can I just take a moment and point out the vintagey Halloween stuff? While some of it's cutesy, a lot of it was like far creepier than some of the stuff you see in mass today. Mm-hmm. Just because it has that homemade aspect to it,
yeah.
It's just a little bit more creepy.
There's actually a change in the way we perceive witches. The witches of the 19th century were old, they had big noses, and there were warts. And the witches in the 20th century are actually kind of attractive. It makes Halloween just a little, not only scary, but also a little naughty.
But even as Halloween was dressing its old customs in new costumes, it was also creating new traditions, bad ones. Was Halloween in the early 20th century getting out of hand? To the dismay of authorities and property owners, the answer was yes.
It was whatever you could think of that was a bunch of mischief. Back in those days, people had buggies. The bigger kids tried to take a buggy and put it up on a haystack. And there's about a half a dozen of the guys, and they just kind of pushed it up the haystack. It was a lot of fun. Oh, we never did anything that was really destructive. Mostly tricks.
Now think about that, though. This is the era where it was still buggies, so not very many automobiles, if any at all, right? And what did that newspaper article that they showed say? Cost City thousands.
Mm-hmm.
Thousands back then would be the equivalent of millions now, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, every year, on a set day, every year, that level of destruction. Oh, yeah. Something would have to happen. Something would have to change, for sure.
But for others, those tricks were more destructive. Pranks, usually committed by adolescent boys, plagued cities like Chicago and Philadelphia. By the 1920s, Halloween in America was turning into a crisis. Tricks on Halloween night were out of hand.
The destructive pranks went beyond just smashing pumpkins. Kids would take bars of soap, and they'd put them in the rails for streetcars so that the streetcars would derail and people would actually get hurt. They would take the steps in front of people's doors and move them so when people walked outside, they would fall over and get hurt. They would set fires. They would throw stones through windows. I mean, this is really destructive stuff.
In rural communities, pranksters took wagons apart and reassembled them on roofs. They removed gates on farm fences so that animals could escape. This particular prank was so popular that in some places, the night before Halloween was called Gate Night. In other cities, it was Mischief Night, or even Hell Night. Halloween pranks during the Great Depression may have been, in part, a product of the desperation of the time, an excuse for troublemaking. But there was already trouble everywhere, and many communities couldn't afford to feed their own, much less clean up destructive messes.
The Halloween of 1933 was actually labeled Black Halloween in a lot of newspapers because of all of the destruction that the cities incurred. The kids were no longer just doing innocent, silly things. Now they were smashing light bulbs. They were setting fire to buildings. They were smashing car windows.
If Halloween were to survive, it would have to change.
Schools and police departments and other civic groups consciously and very actively promoted the idea of taming Halloween.
So, like, setting fire and letting, like, cattle and stuff like that out, that's, like, and you can tell just from the way they're talking about it, this was, like, slow progression over years. This wasn't something that just started out like that.
No, but again, never underestimate the sheer stupidity of young'uns.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's all well and good when nothing's going to possibly happen to you because, well, you're a kid and nothing can happen to you. You know, it's like, again, the kids were just as stupid back then as they are now. I mean...
Oh, yeah.
And generally as rambunctious and unruly as, like, you know, kids nowadays, so...
Yeah. And, I mean, they're doing a good job pointing out the fact that, you know, the Depression also probably didn't help. And let's face it, people, in general, even adults, have a very bad tendency of doing things that are very bad for you when things are desperate, that are pretty counterintuitive, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So...
And so they started to invent all sorts of things for kids to do, to divert them. Townwide parties, costume contests, games, everything that you could think of to get the kids away from pulling tricks and into the light.
Novelty companies like Dennison and Beistel helped out these civic efforts. Dennison published a series of Halloween guides called Bogey Books that suggested ways of turning Halloween from a prank night into a party night.
Denison was one of the first companies that realized there was money to be made off of Halloween. They started to put their own Halloween materials out for retail sale in drugstores all over America.
They also made masks and paper costumes. This was a first. It was the first time that costumes were specifically made and marketed for Halloween. Before that, costumes had all been homemade.
When I was a kid, it wasn't Halloween outfits like you wear now. So basically, you wore your overalls or your jeans or sloppy clothes, but you didn't go downtown and buy a special outfit just for Halloween. Just anything, you know, to make yourself a little conspicuous.
Paper costumes were fancy and an improvement on the homemade variety, but they had their drawbacks.
Unfortunately, a lot of that paper was flammable, and I was surprised at how many newspapers.
Kind of funny.
The way it was phrased.
Yeah, like, oh,
a lot of that paper tended to be flammable. Yeah, it's paper.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wait a second. Tended to be. You mean not unanimously was? God, I need to get my hands on some of this paper tech from back in the day.
Right.
Fireproof paper? Holy crap. Move aside fizzy lifting drinks.
Paper clippings I came across of costumes catching fire.
Soon, other manufacturers, looking to tap into the kid market for Halloween costumes, began making more durable disguises.
Sears' first box costumes came around 1930, and then it went from there. And the costumes came off of radio show characters and the funny papers. Costumes for parties, costumes for wild, town-wide parties, and for school parties and church parties. Halloween was a big social occasion.
Halloween parades also helped drag the holiday out from the shadows and into the public arena.
I miss Halloween parades.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was in elementary school, I think it was one of the last years that they had done Halloween parade, because they did them when I was in first grade. And I think second or third grade is when they stopped doing them. Did they do them when you were in school?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Generally either Halloween day itself or the day closest to Halloween previous, so generally a Friday in that case. But yep, get to wear your costume to school, or at least take it with, and around the Halloween party time, get all decked out. And then basically, each class would basically get in their group and, just effectively cruise around the school. It's not like we really went in depth in any of the neighborhoods or anything.
See, when I was in school, at least 1 year. I don't know if it was all the years up till then, but at least it was either kindergarten or first grade, but we actually did it around the block. It wasn't wholly in the neighborhood, but it was around the block for sure.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, some of the stuff that we did around Halloween time is kind of sad, because you don't see them in a lot of places anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, churches will do trunk or treats now, but they don't do Halloween parties. For as much as I don't like our old church, they did do Halloween really well.
Oh, yeah. Well, pretty much anything in the fall, really.
Yeah.
Allentown, Pennsylvania may have had the first parade in 1905, but others soon followed. Toms River, New Jersey in 1919. Anoka, Minnesota in 1920. Anoka has held its parade every year since. In fact, the city now bills itself the Halloween capital of the world. Each of these local efforts to tame Halloween worked to some extent. But what Halloween really needed was a whole new tradition, and it would soon get one. But this new tradition would prove to be a variation on a very old Halloween theme. Trick or treat. That phrase still triggers cascades of candy into plastic pumpkins and pillowcases across America on the night of October 31st. And though the custom goes back centuries, the phrase trick or treat is probably less than 100 years old.
Trick-or-treat is amazingly new. People think trick-or-treat goes back for centuries, and it doesn't. Trick-or-treat is actually less than 80 years old, probably. The term derives from pranking that was very widespread and destructive in America in the 20th century. And at some point, somebody came up with the brilliant idea of buying off these pranksters.
Homeowners bribed rowdy kids with homemade treats, such as popcorn balls and candy apples, to avoid getting pranked or tricked. In 1939, the phrase and the custom turned up in print.
Doris Hudson Moss published an article in American Home magazine that talked about the success she had having a Halloween open house for the kids in her neighborhood. She didn't get tricked. She gave them sweets. It all worked.
With the new custom came new treats. Not so much homemade goodies like popcorn.
I will say, packaging for candy back in the day looked so much better than now. Of course, back then they probably would have thought it looked stupid, but...
It's kind of minimalistic for my tastes, but...
It depends on which one. I mean, not all of them looked super awesome, but like a lot of them compared to packaging now.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because we're so used to the styles now. Whereas we look back at the old stuff and it's like, aw, get a nostalgia for an era we didn't even grow up in, you know?
Balls. Now kids got store-bought, pre-packaged candies. Mars bars, Reese's cups, and good old Hershey's chocolate. Candy finally killed the rowdy Halloween. And now the time was right for the reinvented holiday to hit Hollywood.
Uh-oh, the boys!
People always like to point out, oh, Huey, Dewey, and Louie give Donald such a hard time. I'm like, part of me wonders, I think he started it when they were younger.
I've always kind of, whenever my mind comes around to it, it's gotta be some of column A, some of column B. It's like, you know.
Oh yeah, he was probably that uncle who liked to play what he thought was good-hearted tricks on the kids, and the kids just probably a little bit more like me than not. We're just like, really, fuck you.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you're gonna be a dick to us, huh? Well, we're gonna go find the like mean old witch down the lane, and we'll see what happens then.
I mean, this one, case in point, they come trick-or-treating. They're coming in good faith, and what does he do?
Yeah, and they're all happy. They're just having a good old time.
Bags. He destroys their entire haul because he's being an asshole. I mean, dude, I've seen kids
and then laughs at them as they're running away screaming in terror because things are exploding around them, you know? It's like, huh.
Yeah, those aren't meant to be exploded in your hands. Those are meant to be set, and then you walk away and watch them go up. That's like full-on danger. I mean, granted, it's a cartoon. It's not like anything was going to happen. But, I mean, I'm sticking by my guns on this. I think Donald started this when they were too young to remember, and it's just caused an ages-long friction between them.
Hello, boys! Trick or treat!
Halloween was becoming a pop culture phenomenon, a national festival attended by millions, celebrating the joys of scavenging for mass-produced candy.
I loved Halloween when I was a kid. I participated in it. I loved the rituals of it. I loved the pranks of it. I loved the mischief of it. I loved going to houses and dressing up and getting candy, and then there were parties. I mean, it was just fantastic.
Then in 1966, Halloween found a home where all pop culture ultimately goes: TV. Halloween's stature zoomed off the charts when America went trick-or-treating with Charlie Brown.
The whole idea of the Great Pumpkin, of course, came from the comic strip when Sparky Schultz decided that it would be very funny if one of the kids got his holidays mixed up. And so that's how Linus ends up in the pumpkin patch every year.
Who are you writing to, Linus? This is the time of year to write to the Great Pumpkin. On Halloween night, the Great Pumpkin rises out of his pumpkin patch and flies through the air with this bag of toys for all the children. You must be crazy.
It's kind of like the story of the Great Pumpkin.
It's the story of Santa. Here's...
Oh, no, it absolutely is, and that's what cracks me up about it, I mean.
Here's the thing, and I'm reading a lot into cartoons tonight, but, I mean, hey, topic of conversation. Where the fuck did this kid get this idea?
I have no clue, but he is so damned earnest about it. It's like, you can tell. He is like, he'll come and he'll give candy and toys to all the good little girls and boys, and it's like, I've heard this somewhere before, but you know what, kid? You do you, man. You do you.
Again, I think there's like some really fucked up uncle in the back, or dad, or grandpa, or whatever in the background.
Some adult figure who's just like, I wonder if he'll figure this one out.
Yeah, Santa ain't real. It's a magic pumpkin. Come on.
When are you going to stop believing in something that isn't true? When you stop believing in that fellow with the red suit and the white beard.
Television and America's most popular comic strip had given Halloween its unofficial seal of approval. The holiday had never in its entire history been so mainstream. But Halloween-themed cartoons aimed at kids were one thing. A movie for adults with Halloween as its theme was another. Nobody had ever tried it before. That is, until director John Carpenter took a stab at it in 1978 with the classic Halloween.
The idea for calling my film Halloween came from...
They have 2 different Halloween throw blankets at Spirit this year.
Oh.
The typical one is Halloween 6, Curse of Michael Myers, which is hilarious because most people don't like it. But they actually have one where, you remember the Stormtrooper shirt that I got Kato a while back, where it was like the different faces of the Stormtrooper, but it was just the same Stormtrooper?
Mm-hmm.
It's like that, but it's Michael.
Okay.
The distributor, and when he said it, I thought, well, you know, he's right, absolutely right. There's never been really a Halloween-themed film. It's one of those eye-openers. Wow, why didn't I think of that years ago? What a great idea.
Carpenter's $325,000 film would spawn a franchise grossing more than $500 million. It broke new ground, elevating the horror film from B-movie status to respected genre. And completely by accident, the film would also redefine our attitudes about Halloween masks. It started when the wardrobe budget forced the crew to create a mask for the villain, Michael Myers, for next to nothing.
The production designer ran up to Burt Wheeler's magic shop on Hollywood Boulevard and bought this Captain Kirk from Star Trek mask, which didn't look anything like William Shatner, just looked this strange face, elongated face. But it was spray painted and fixed up a little bit. It was distorted, which is perfect. It's kind of written that way in the script, as wearing a face.
The bargain basement mask and the villain behind it soon became another Halloween icon.
Michael Myers still, even though the original movie came out in 1978, it still remains one of the most popular Halloween characters of all time.
This idea of the masked stalker menacing young people at Halloween, it shifted the focus of Halloween away from ghosts and goblins to human villainy.
But this nondescript mask did much more than that. It helped to redefine the limits of what a Halloween mask could be. And it ushered in a new face of Halloween, one for a new millennium.
Excuse me, with the Halloween mask. A lot of people, the ongoing issues with getting the mask right since the first movie. And a lot of folks are always like, oh, the second movie, they used a different mask. No, they used the same mask. They had a different actor, so he filled out the mask differently, and it had been stuck in a box in Deborah's house, and she was a chain smoker back then, so it was yellowed. But I'm like, they keep talking about the original mold. I'm like, you'd have to get a William Shatner mold.
Yeah.
Like,
you'd literally have to go back to the original, company that made the mask and get their mold there.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to bet by this point, they didn't have it no mo.
Yeah. I will say, before Halloween 2018, probably the closest replacement mask was arguably the most fucked up Halloween movie ever, which was Resurrection. Busta Rhymes.
Okay.
Although, had one of the best comedic scenes in any Halloween movie. Michael Myers tracking Michael Myers, who then turns around startled and starts cussing the real Michael Myers out in Busta Rhymes' voice.
I don't remember that part.
If you watch that movie as a comedy instead of a horror, it's fabulous.
For hundreds of years, masks and costumes have been a way for partiers to disguise themselves. And now, it's a multi-million-dollar business. One Halloween-themed store, Burbank, California's Halloween Town, is so popular, it's open 12 months of the year, satisfying customers' need for disguise.
We need to go to the permanent Halloween store in Phoenix.
Oh, we have one out here too?
Yeah, it's not the same company. It's called Evil Izzy's Haunted Halloween Emporium. Yeah, it opened this year.
We've had this business for 10 years now, and we really wanted to make it special, so we decided to open a year-round permanent store with ultimate spooky shopping environment. It really puts people in the mood to shop for Halloween.
Halloween stuff is all over the store, but the heart of Halloween Town's business is masks.
We have dozens of masks. We have the best zombies you can find, the best clowns.
Masks and disguises have always been great ways to let you off the hook in terms of your behavior. With an acting out kind of holiday like Halloween, of course, it's perfect.
When I was a kid, I loved masks, but usually all you could find at the local stores were crappy plastic, flimsy masks that lost their shape. But as time went on, they've really evolved into an art form where there's a lot of time spent in the sculpting and the painting, and now it's to the point where you can get an expensive, high-end mask that almost rivals movie quality.
And Wayne Toth would know. He's a special effects artist for major motion pictures.
We have a lot of customers that like higher-end stuff or high-quality stuff, so we go out of our way to get that. We have high-end costumes, fancy jackets, and all kinds of accessories you really couldn't find anywhere else. We try and make it so no matter what you're looking for, you can find it here.
Today's upscale masks and costumes are a far cry from the generic devils, witches, skeletons, and ghosts of the 1960s. But that's the decade when the Halloween wardrobe began to change. Hollywood started to influence what kids wore, transforming them into their favorite TV and movie characters. Today, that trend...
Kind of true, but not really, because they had already said when they started doing the mass-produced costumes that they were based off like the radio shows. So it was not as uniform because, you know, just going off of like a vocal description. But that said, it was still based off of like whatever pop culture was at the time.
Yeah.
So it was just Hollywood was finally becoming the center of pop culture.
And has escalated to an obsession. Film franchises like A Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, and Halloween are inspiring growing legions of kids to dress to kill.
To wear the mask of the killer or of the ghost, of the skeleton, it gives a kid a sense of a lot of power and also of safety, because the monster can't get you if you are the monster for that moment.
Crazed killer masks are just part of Halloween's evolving taste in costumes. The only rule now is that there are no rules. Masks take their inspiration from pop culture, religion, politics, you name it. And a growing number of faces behind them belongs not to kids, but adults.
Halloween has become a huge adult activity, and I don't think that was the case, say, 50, 60 years ago. But it's been, again, specific days set aside where you can be somebody that you normally aren't. You can get behind a mask, you can wear clothes you would never wear during the rest of the year, and people enjoy these.
Truth is, our 21st century Halloween is as much a holiday for adults as it is a holiday for kids.
You get those children who are now growing up, and they become very nostalgic for Halloween. So Halloween shifts again, starts to become more of an adult holiday.
Halloween businesses now cater to anyone who wants to get into the spirit of the holiday, with parties and Halloween-themed venues such as haunted houses.
50 years ago, when you were too old to trick or treat, you probably had to stay home and hand out candy. There was nothing else for you to do. Now there is a vast and imaginative haunted house industry just for you. And there's something like 4,000.
There's one over at the mall.
Oh, there is?
Mm-hmm. I'll have to look up and see how much it is. If we get a chance, maybe we can go.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're not cheap anymore, but I mean, you know.
No, but I mean, nothing's cheap anymore.
Mm-hmm. God, so what was the last one of those you went to? Was that when we went to Cooperstown? Or Alice Cooper's Nightmare, or...
No, the one that was in Scottsdale. So we did Alice Cooper's Nightmare when I was still at MCC. We went to that, was that Ghost Town or whatever it was, over by the freeway.
Oh, okay,
where
that's
had,
right,
like,
yeah.
multiple different, I don't even know if they're still open. But they had the guy who was dressed as Alice, and he had the skull from rabbit ears. That was the last one I think we went to.
Okay.
Although, I guess Rawhide does stuff for Halloween, too.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe next year we can do that, because I don't want to, like, pay for one of the big places until Kiddo's at a point where he can handle it.
Yeah.
I think next year he might. It just depends on whether or not he wants to go.
1,000 haunted houses in the United States every year.
I loved haunted houses. It fascinated me. They terrified me as a kid.
But haunted houses aren't the only place to find adults getting out on Halloween. In places like New York City's Greenwich Village Halloween Parade and West Hollywood's Halloween Carnival, the holiday takes a walk on the wild and naughty side.
Of course, the gay Halloween parade is now a big fixture in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, and of course a big part of the New York celebration. But it's this idea of turning the world on its head and being who you aren't or would like to be. Again, it's that mercurial American obsession with self-transformation. And that's the thing I think that really...
I will say, if I were, like, filming random people in costume, and one of them is dressed as, like, a scary jester, just, like, dead-eyeing me, just... I'd be freaked out. I mean, you're gonna have people that do that on Halloween, because it's Halloween, but it's also, like... in the back of your head, you're like, is this like the 1% of someone who's actually crazy and is going to do something?
Ignited Halloween in America.
This sexually liberated Halloween sometimes crosses the line from adults to adults only.
If you look at the costumes that are sold to adults these days, the costumes for women are all kind of borderline prostitute costumes. You know, the sexy nurse, the sexy maid, the sexy anything.
Now, grown-ups are taking it one step further. They stock up on specially packaged Halloween novelty candy and join their children going door to door on Halloween night. These trick-or-treaters of the 1970s and 80s now seize the opportunity to relive their childhood Halloweens, dressing in full costume, supposedly to keep a watchful eye on their kids. And just as Halloween has scared kids for years, Halloween scares parents too. They fear sending their kids out unsupervised into a hostile world, full of poisoned candy and razor blade riddled apples. But they really shouldn't be.
That happened so many times through my childhood.
Yeah, no, the razor blade one never made sense to me. That said, there are fucked up people out
Oh,
there.
yeah, absolutely, you know.
And I think it probably didn't necessarily have as much. That was probably just like to scare the kids from eating too much candy too fast, for being honest. But I'd venture to say, if you were to look up like missing children, the numbers probably went up right around Halloween night. Because what are predators really good at? Exploiting things. So, and it's not to be a worry word or anything, because if you bring your kids up to be like in a group, you know, and watch out for each other, it should be fine. But let's face it, most kids are assholes. So.
I grew up hearing about razor blades and apples myself, And it's clearly what we would call a contemporary legend. Another term is urban legend. There's a great societal unease about this idea that we're telling our kids to go take candy from strangers. So there's a lot of...
You know how I watch some of those like true crime podcasts and all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
One of them was talking about a guy who looks like may have intentionally killed either, I can't remember if it was his kids or his stepkids, by lacing their pixie sticks. And this was back when pixie sticks were still super, super popular, so it could be one of the stories that had led to the concept of like the razor blades and all that shit and just got distorted.
Stories about razor blades and candied apples and these sorts of things. And parents every year get very, very worried about it. Did razor blades and apples ever happen? I believe there are a couple of cases, but of course you can ask which came first, the story or the actions.
Razor blades in apples, jack-o'-lanterns, soul cakes. They make up the legends, the texture of the Halloween we know. Today, Halloween wears many masks. It's a day for adults to push their boundaries a little.
Clearly, a lot of women want to have a very sexy side of them, and it's only on Halloween that they bring it out. Maybe, they could do a little more often.
Yet Halloween still remains the domain of kids.
When you're a kid, you had one night a year where you were in charge. You got to dress up. You got to be something that you usually weren't. And you kind of even got paid for the privilege of it.
I mean, if we're being honest here, it's part of, like, the evolution of things, Women have slowly, over the last few decades, become more and more liberated, so to speak, in terms of, like, sexuality and whatnot. And it's just kind of been continuous, every major change in history has done it. After the suffragette movement, you had women going to work, and then I don't necessarily have to get married as early because I'm earning my own money. I'm renting a cheap apartment with some friends. And then, with birth control, brought in another level of liberation. It's just as, ongoing teeter-totter of...
It was an amazing holiday.
Halloween doesn't like to have its energies tamed. It's the rebellious aspect is going to pop up somewhere.
Look close enough, and you'll see that Halloween is a showcase of everything the human race fears. Through the centuries, we've learned to live with what scares us most. And now, on October 31st, we turn our fears into fun. So beware of haunted houses and creaking doors, billowing sheets and full moons. And don't be surprised if a smiling jack-o'-lantern wishes you Happy Halloween.
Oh, gods, I remember this one, too.
Maybe we'll do that one later in the week.
Binky the Clown!
I remember he scared the shit out of me.
He was a definitely unsettling character.
I think he was drawn to be scary, for sure. So, what did you think of that one?
Again, I'm pretty sure I've seen it before. Pretty good. For at least a basic cursory kind of level examination on a lot of the, history and what led to everything. Yeah, pretty decent, so...
Yeah. I think they did a pretty good job of, pointing out where different customs came from. And I think for anybody out there who's in Europe and isn't used to American customs, it would be a pretty good introduction to American Halloween and how it got to be the way it is. Mm-hmm. It's funny because so many of the people that I watch that are from Europe and Ireland keep talking about how they want to start doing more of these things there. I'm like, so
do it, yeah.
Yeah, get a group of friends together and do a big ass Halloween party. If it gets popular enough, it'll spread, just like everything else. If there's one thing we Americans are good at, is infecting the rest of the world with our culture, good or not. So, I think the next video we have planned is going to be either Halloween Town Mr. Boogedy or Hocus Pocus over on Rumble. And that'll probably be in a few days to next week. depending on how long it takes us to do.
But with that, I myself have a couple of things I need to take care of. So I will probably go ahead and take this opportunity to say thank you guys for watching. I hope everyone had an enjoyable and educational time.
We'll see you all next time, guys.
Catch
Bye-bye.
you later.
As I start flinging things around the room. Why not?
Ooh, that was a bad snap.
Ooh.